You're listening to There Ought to Be a Law, the Center for Auto Safety podcast with Executive Director Michael Brooks, Chief Engineer Fred Perkins, and hosted by me, Anthony Cimino. For over 50 years, the Center for Auto Safety has worked to make cars safer.
All right, I'm in.
Great. Hey, listeners. Let's just jump right into an ongoing topic, the Hyundai Kia thefts and how you can steal a Hyundai and a Kia. Look, first what you do is you go onto the Tik Tok and you just search for how do I steal a Hyundai Kia. I don't know if you can even search TikTok. I've never been on TikTok. I don't know. But this article in Vice talks about cities around the U.S. are facing a staggering new normal when it comes to stolen cars, and I'm facing a staggering amount of sibilance every time I say an S word. The example they use is Chicago used to have about 850 cars stolen per month. And look, I put an S at the end of that. How did that happen? Now it consistently has more than 2,000, an average of 86 cars stolen every single day. This is crazy. And the vast majority are Hyundai and Kias.
The article is great. I mean, because what they're doing is sending out public information requests to, I think they said 100 cities. They're still in the process of collecting the data. And what you see generally on every chart is a massive spike in thefts somewhere around the spring of 2022. And typically you'll see a large spike, way more than double. And you're talking many times the rate of theft in a couple of months, and then the thefts drop, but they don't drop back to the old normal. They're still way up. So what the article is pointing out is that we may not ever see, or at least for the next few years, or at least until Hyundai and Kia get this fix out to all of their owners, we may not see these theft rates drop to what it was before, which is very concerning.
Well, they also point out that the thefts are associated with lots of secondary crimes, not only people just driving their cars away, but also with people driving too fast, people who don't have licenses, speeding around, thefts. I guess some murders are associated with it as well, people using these cars without authority. So it's not only the problem of the cars themselves and the property crimes associated with it, but there are a lot of other downstream violent crimes that are being associated with the free availability of free transportation for people who really shouldn't have it.
So Hyundai Kia in the past, we've kind of joked about how their first fix was, hey, we'll send you the club, that silly thing that goes across your steering wheel from like late or 1980s, early 90s infomercials. They stopped doing that, and then they had something else where we'll upgrade some software if you beg. What's the latest? What's going on there for owners?
I mean, the latest is the same. It's the status quo. It's Hyundai and Kia are still, offering as an upgrade, a software upgrade, a customer satisfaction program, this software package. But so far, at least as of last month, they had only gotten it to about 1/5 of the vehicles that are subject to these types of thefts. So they've got a long way to go. And if that number doesn't, increase from 20 to 80 or so, I'm not sure if we're going to see these thefts go down appreciably in these places. I mean, right now it looks to be like, hundreds of individuals running around these cities that know how to easily steal these vehicles. And we think that there needs to be a lot more done, both by Hyundai and Kia. We think NHTSA needs to take another look at this and figure out if they have the authority to make this a recall. And, we want to make sure that this doesn't happen again in the future. We need standards in place that'll prevent this. And then one other note on the article that I found really intriguing. If you look at the cities, it looks like somebody had the TikTok hack or knew about this in Denver long before these other cities came around to it. I'd be really interested to see if there are any other cities that match that Denver pattern once all 100 cities have reported their data to the motherboard who wrote the article.
I don't know, but the article mentions towards the end that about 2 million of the 9 million vehicles vulnerable to the theft cannot receive the software update. And as of July, about 5 million vehicles still remain vulnerable to theft, either because they haven't gotten the software update or they were not eligible for some reason. And there have been reports in Buffalo and Washington, D.C. of vehicles with the software update still being stolen. So, okay, so I go and I get the upgrade if I qualify for it, and they're still stealing my car.
Yeah.
So consumers are just kind of, you're just, and wait, and I remember we mentioned once in the past that some auto insurance companies are like, yeah, we're not covering these vehicles anymore. Is that still an issue?
Well, that could still be an issue. It's not where it was in January before. I mean, I believe that the insurance company is coming out and announcing that is what spurred Hyundai and Kia to go ahead and get this software out. And, our opinion, I think, is that the software was, rushed, and we know that it's not compatible with some other, like if you have an aftermarket security system, there's no guarantee with it that it's compatible with that. The software hasn't been validated against all of these aftermarket systems, and there have been circumstances where consumers have had the software installed. They mentioned DC and somewhere else, but we've probably heard of 3 or 4 or 5 similar reports from consumers who had the software installed, thought they were doing the right thing, and then someone used the TikTok hack on their car. So that's concerning as well. If the software and the little sticker you get with it to put on your window to show the potential thieves that you've got software in your car, if the software doesn't work, that sticker doesn't work, and you got to start over. So this issue is just, right now, Hyundai has done very little other than give folks a software patch and do a couple of events, PR events, to promote the software update, but they're not achieving any real growth in the numbers of vehicles that have had the patch installed. So, it's a really difficult situation. All the burden here is being thrust onto owners and local police departments and, the victims of some of these stolen vehicles, while, Hyundai and Kia are doing a limited amount to resolve it. And, DOT and NHTSA are, kind of wiping their hands of the issue and pretending that they can't do anything here. So right now, there aren't really any good answers. I don't expect this data to trend to change a whole lot going forward, or to drop a lot, because we just don't see these fixes being put in place.
This is a problem over a certain time period, right? Are the currently being delivered Kias and Hyundais have the same problem?
No. So we know that they're going to be going out of service, and that's really what's going to help here, is these vehicles breaking down and leaving the streets. If nothing else is done soon.
What is
basically every vehicle
period
they made from 2011 to 2021 or so.
Okay, so that 10-year period.
So a couple of questions. Do I need to have the TikTok app on my phone when I try to steal one of these cars? Okay.
I don't know. You stop teaching teenagers how to steal cars, Anthony.
Back in my day. And the other question is, okay, so NHTSA and the DOT are falling flat on their face when it comes down to an issue of essentially cybersecurity in cars. Is that fair to say? So
that's how we describe it. I mean, if you can't get on top of an issue like this and prevent people from dying in the streets, then what's going to happen when there's a real cybersecurity issue that involves software and vehicles moving? How are you going to address that? I think the real crux of the problem is right now they're saying because there's an intervening criminal act here, they don't have a responsibility to conduct this as a recall. But we know that cybersecurity, by definition, you're going to have a hacker or an intervening criminal act to take over these vehicles. So it's a troubling to me that in the future, NHTSA is setting a course now that suggests that they won't be able to respond to cyber attacks that endanger Americans.
Well, it's also interesting to see the magnitude of this problem without an actor who is actually trying to make it happen. So, and this is an accidental apocalypse as far as I can tell. But it only points out that if there were somebody actually trying to make this happen, it could have been much, much worse. There's no limit. I don't think there's any limit on what the cybersecurity hackers could do, or the cyber. What is that word for those people? Cyber hackers, or what are the bad people called?
Teenagers.
Teenagers. Good. Well, maybe this is part of Hyundai's practice of hiring undocumented teenage immigrants to build their cars. Maybe they're not qualified to build the software.
That's a good callback to a deep cut from an earlier episode where we talked about labor practices at their factories. But I think we know how this ends going forward. I mean, Fred, it's his mantra, which is everything will be better in the future. Except if you're at NHTSA or the DOT, you just go, we got to create a new government agency to handle this. We have Space Force. Why not have Hack Force? Ooh, Cyber Squad Force. Ooh, Cyber Squad. Isn't that like, anyway, moving on. Here's a fun little one. From the Associated Press, new report recommends limiting police pursuits to violent crimes after rise in fatalities. That's a lot to take at once. The article starts off with aiming to curb the hundreds of deaths caused by police chases in the U.S. each year. A new report calls for police not to start a pursuit unless a violent crime has been committed and the suspect poses an imminent threat. The study funded by the U.S. Department of Justice Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services, holy crap, and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration highlighted NHTSA data that shows fatal crashes involving a police pursuit peaked at 455 in 2020, the highest since at least 2007, when there were 372 fatalities. So life is not like the movies. The police aren't just like, yeah, let's get them, high-speed chase. It's not like the LA freeway everywhere.
No, there's a lot of procedures. I mean, I think that's one of the things that's highlighted in this report is that every procedure, there's no federal standards here. There's no, there may be some guidance, and this certainly would qualify as guidance because they put out a long list of things that departments should consider in their pursuit policies. But, there's no one way that people do this, or that departments do this across America. And so there's some departments who have, very high rates of pursuits and collisions, and others that don't. And a lot of it depends on their policy. But it's a complex issue from the perspective of there are places that have both relaxed their policies over time, but after strengthening them, so the data is kind of mixed on how, what exactly is causing this sudden rise now. Maybe it's the fact that there are more Hyundais and Kias being stolen and fleeing from police. Who knows? Hey,
everybody's a comedian this week.
And you get down to it, there's still, that was only through about 2020, I think. So there's still, right. I've been looking for more recent data from the last year or two, and there hasn't been a lot. So of data available on the subject. I guess that's one of those things. I believe it goes through NHTSA's FARS process, and that usually takes 18 months or so to wrap up and become final. So that may be why that's not there. But it's, this is going to continue to happen. I don't know. I watch a lot of, sometimes in my spare time, watch cops and those kind of videos. And it's scary as hell watching pursuits to me, because you've got a driver completely out of control, weaving through innocent people or driving like a madman up the road. And when you get to the point where they finally stop and you hear, they were, driving with a tail light out and flee because they had a suspended license, you wonder if all of that really had to happen. And we wonder if the juice was worth the squeeze to get there, and all the people you put at risk to make a small arrest like that. And I think that's part of what the report focused on, is that, you really need to be sure, if you're going to initiate pursuits, that it is a very high value, dangerous subject who is an imminent threat to the community, and not do things that might threaten public safety when you're essentially arresting someone who doesn't pose a threat to public safety.
All right. If the cure is worse than the disease, you probably shouldn't pursue the cure. I think that's what this is all about. It's a question of equity. And, if, in a sense, what the high-speed pursuit is doing is it's escalating a property crime to a capital offense by, putting the lives of the people at risk. Now, what the policy says is that if there is an imminent risk to the public, if there is evidence that there's a violent crime involved, then yes, that's the proper time to have the high-speed pursuit or the pursuit of the vehicle. But short of that, you're not doing the people being pursued any favor. The property crime is not as important and as imminent a threat as a violent crime. And so I think that's what they're trying to do, is to take the adrenaline out of the chase and turn it into a more analytic process that says, is this chase that we're going to pursue with all the risks associated with it, is it really appropriate to the action that's initiated the chase?
And the other thing here, and a component that I think that we support here, is eliminating this decision almost at all. I mean, if you can remotely immobilize a vehicle and law enforcement has that authority to do so in any type of circumstance, say that it's, if, a fleeing person, anything, you don't have to make a determination if they're fleeing police and they're a danger to the public. If you have a button that can immobilize their vehicle, the public safety threat is eliminated immediately. I think that that's something that we need to consider. There are a lot of privacy concerns there, but this situation would be resolved if the police had the ability to stop vehicles at the touch of a button. And we could avoid a lot of these problems and outcomes we're seeing from the stolen Hyundai and Kia vehicles and a lot of other things, if that's a technology that we can accept and that can, escape some of the concerns about privacy and freedom of movement that we might have. We're turning a little bit of power over to police and their determinations in that scenario, but I can't think of a situation I've ever been in where I needed to worry about the police stopping me in my vehicle. So
I'd like to point out that Michael is a law graduate and a white man.
Yeah, and I don't have the same perspective as the rest of the world here, but I just, it seemed like we're already going to a point where driver monitoring systems are going to be looking at the driver, determining whether the driver's paying attention, determining whether they've been drinking, inebriated, having a medical event, and stopping the car. I don't think that stopping cars when there is a criminal act taking place is a stretch from that point. And it's certainly, from a safety perspective, probably a good thing.
We should remind listeners, though, who are interested in autonomous vehicles, that there is no way for police to stop an autonomous vehicle for good or for bad reasons. They're just going to go and do what they're doing. And as far as we can tell, none of the autonomous vehicle developers are including in their design any capability for police to stop the vehicles on demand, much less the occupants to stop the vehicle on demand.
Well, clearly, Fred, you've not been listening to the words of Mr. Kyle Vaught, CEO of GM Cruise, who says the entire purpose of their company is to make the world safer. It's to save lives and to make the roads safer. It's not to recoup investors' money at all. It's all for safety. Why are you cynical? Humans are terrible drivers, according to somebody named Kyle. Okay.
I'm not cynical. I'm bald.
Hey. But real quick, as an aside, something important we glanced over. Michael, you mentioned watching Cops. My favorite episode of Cops was one where it was a home invasion and the police officer went into the house to investigate, and it was a hog. A hog got in someone's house and just rampaged the place. It was amazing.
That sounds like my house.
Well, it did take place in the South. So
Was
yeah,
there a Piggly Wiggly involved?
Oh wow, look at that. How many minutes into the show and he gets his Piggly Wiggly fix. Hey, Piggly Wiggly, if you're listening, come to autosafety.org and click on the donate button. You can click it with your hoof or your pig. Yeah, it's just hoofs, right? It's only hoofs.
A snout. There you
Snout?
go.
Oh, a snout or a hoof. We'll take cash though. That'd be good. So I'm going to jump into my favorite person on planet Earth, Kyle. He got to sit down with some friendly people at, I don't know, one of these sycophantic tech fund organization nonsense where they throw very softball questions to Kyle, and he was asked questions about the GM Cruise origin. This is a thing we've mentioned that looks like two ugly halves of a Honda Odyssey bubbled gum together. This is a vehicle that doesn't have a steering wheel, doesn't have pedals, and that Kyle's come out and said, hey, the government's going to totally let us skip all safety regulations for these vehicles and get it out on the road. And the government's like, what's that, bro? And he's like,
I haven't seen that one yet.
Yeah, he hasn't. They haven't come out and said that. So this is a 6-seater vehicle with 3 seats facing backwards and 3 seats facing forward. Very simple softball question to Kyle was like, this seems like a weird layout. Like that seems a lot of extra space. Like, why would you have all of this space here? And his response was, the purpose is to encourage pooling. So now, like, if you get into like a ride share and it's a pool, like you have to sit next to somebody side by side uncomfortably. And now with our tool, you can sit across from somebody and look at them breathing at you uncomfortably. Like, this is clearly a man who's never heard of humans, and nor he's never heard of mass transit. Like, that was an argument for mass transit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of us would prefer that everyone be facing forward. The introverts, maybe Kyle's an extrovert. No.
Well, he's some kind of vert. And I don't know, maybe just do it in the way that cars have been crash tested for, I don't know, however long they've been crash tested. Further on,
there were some other things in there that were interesting. I guess the numbers, the projections of how much money they can make, if you compare it to like Uber, didn't make a lot of sense. Seems like they're overestimating how much they're going to grow, how much money they're going to make. They say they're going to be ready for winter in a couple of years. That sounds like nonsense. But you know, I don't even think they're driving in thunderstorms and things yet in the South. So I don't know. Some of that sounded just like more aspirational tech bro stuff that really, when it comes down to it, isn't going to happen or isn't happening on the time frames that are continually set to appease investors.
Yeah. Someone asked him,
I'm sorry, Anthony. It's going to be really fun to see those push me pull yous navigating New York City traffic on a snowy winter day. I'm just looking forward to that.
No, I mean, New York is flat out said this is not going to happen. But so they asked a very simple question about the business model for this and the case for this. And he was like, well, we're not getting into specifics, but you can kind of do the math. And so I sat down and I kind of did the math, and I don't see how this happens at all. I mean, GM's spending over $2 billion a year on this. They've invested at least $5 billion. And right now, you got 300 cruises running around San Francisco. They've estimated that's like an annual revenue of $17 million. Sounds like a lot, except when you've spent billions and billions. So he'd have to have these like running 24 hours a day in like 20 to 30 U.S. cities around the clock. And they would have to own the rideshare market. They would have to have Uber wouldn't exist, Lyft wouldn't exist, taxi service wouldn't exist. And all of their revenue would have to be pure profit. And then, in, let's say maybe 10, 15 years, they break even. I don't get it. Like,
I don't get it either. And what you're highlighting there is exactly why I don't get it. I just don't see the use case that these vehicles add to our streets. They're clogging up, adding more congestion to streets, and they're not bringing anything that already available modes of rideshare are bringing. So, do we need them there right now? I know the folks in Austin don't think so this week.
Right. So yeah, Cruise got let loose on the streets of Austin, Texas, because Cruise is staying in the South because there's no winter there and weather's relatively mild. So Cruise's vehicles broke down. A bunch of them came into an intersection at once, saw each other and went, "You're ugly. No, you're ugly. Let's stop working." And they stopped working. There's a video you can find online, and basically, Cruise said, according to them, the fleet ended up in a high demand area. How dare they? Which also brought with it a slew of pedestrian and passenger vehicle traffic, hence the high demand area. One of the vehicles got stuck in an intersection while committing to a turn, thus further congesting traffic in 3 different directions. Unfortunately, more and more Cruise robotaxis flooded the narrow Austin street to meet the peak demand, only to join the traffic jam.
It sounds like they're playing sardines. Did you ever play that?
Yeah, as a kid, this is hilarious. Unfortunately, Cruise could not manually reroute the vehicles quickly enough, so there was nowhere for them to go. Okay, so their whole argument is, hey, this makes traffic better. This will take congestion off the road, and they get into a situation where it's like people request it. It's in an area where there's a lot of other vehicles and pedestrian traffic, and their entire system collapses. And they're like, hey,
Oh,
we're
now,
better than
to
humans.
be fair to them, Anthony, they said they're going to take proactive measures to fix the problem. They're proactive. They're not just regular measures. They're proactive. And I always thought of that as some kind of intestinal relief mechanism, but maybe they got something else in mind.
Huh. I always thought proactive some sort of skin tincture.
It is.
Okay, good.
But they're going to apply that, these proactive measures to the situation. So it should be fine in the future. Everything will be better in the future.
Well, maybe.
It's their expanded ODD.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they say. They expanded ODD. How do you expand an ODD that quick, Fred? Can you expand an ODD in response to one event?
I don't know. The interesting part of this to me is that this whole situation was caused by people responding to what they think their business model is, which is people calling in the self-driving vehicles when there's a need for transportation. And yeah, their system collapsed, and they collapsed every other system around themselves. They're like the black hole of traffic.
Hey, they didn't drive into wet cement this week. That's look at that. They're getting better. The last highlight of a man called Kyle I have to comment on is during, again, this very softball interview, the interviewer said, hey, a lot of people in San Francisco are kind of like, they're a little against this. City of San Francisco, they cut your fleet in half after you guys crap the bed there. And his response to this was, well, in California, there was a democratic process and they voted for us to have this. Kyle neglects that the democratic process was similar to that they have in Russia every few years, or in Uganda, that they bought and paid for a member of the California Public Utility Commission.
Now, Anthony, they didn't buy and pay for a member of the California Public Utilities Commission. He was a former employee who was their managing counsel for a couple of years ago.
To be clear, they bought, but it's not clear that they paid for it.
Okay, so I apologize. There's a man named Mr. Reynolds. He used to be the general counsel for GM Cruise, and then he left there to go work for the California Public Utilities Commission, which oversees GM Cruise. It's just weird, I know.
Yeah, that's still kind of an odd thing here. That's what public utilities commissions around the country seem. It doesn't seem to be unique to California where this type of thing happens. From what I've learned since then, so maybe that's something that Congress should address.
That would be good, or just legislators in general. But California seems to be a little weird when it comes to these vehicles.
Well, they're following the NHTSA model, really, because if you think of a lot of the officers in NHTSA have also come from the automobile industry. And the argument is always that, people with experience in the automobile industry should be put into positions to regulate the automobile industry. It's too sophisticated for anybody else to do it. Maybe that, I don't think that that's true myself, but apparently a lot of the legislators do.
It's like, who was the head of the U.S. Treasury for a while? Wasn't he a former head of a bank? And then he's like, hey, the economy tanked. Let's throw a bunch of money to the banks. Hank Paulson. Hank Paulson? That guy?
Don't know.
Anyway, getting off topic here.
Off topic.
I know. Sticking to California here. Governor Gavin Newsom vetoed legislation this past week that required safety drivers in autonomous trucks. And in his veto message to lawmakers, tucked in the bottom of a Friday night press release, Newsom said the bill is not needed, the bill that would require safety drivers inside robo 18-wheelers, and suggested that concerns about jobs as well as safety are best addressed by regulators, not legislation. I can't even say this stuff with a straight face. Come on, man. Like, he's basically saying, it's not my job. That's somebody else's gig. And in California, who appoints those regulators? Would that be the governor?
It's a little troubling. I mean, they literally vetoed this bill because they are to lose, not because it didn't protect safety. They didn't even discuss safety. It was all about jobs and investments, which is a little scary when you see, a bill passed in California and going to the governor vetoed based solely on that purpose when it's something that impacts safety. And, I think we wanted this bill to extend to vehicles under 10,000 pounds that would include robo-taxis and some other things, because we just don't think they're ready for prime time without a trained safety driver. So that was a disappointment from the governor. Hopefully he won't disappoint us even more by passing and signing this law that attacks the California lemon law either.
Okay, fill us in on the
when
lemon law.
When he talks about regulators, are these the same people who regulated the AVs in San Francisco? Do you know? Is it the PUC again, or is it a different group?
No, he just vaguely said regulators. It's better handled by regulators instead of legislators. And
which in California would be the DMV and the California Public Utilities Commission, both of which are involved.
And who appoints those people in those? Would that be the governor here? Wait a second. This is some. So, Michael, you mentioned briefly the California lemon law. Fill us in.
Yeah, we mentioned it last week, where they're increasing the limit on claims that will be directed into this special jurisdiction court in California, the courts of limited jurisdiction. And they're increasing the limit from $25,000 to $35,000, which brings in a lot of car buyers in that segment, particularly lower cost models. And we're really concerned that the ultimate result of this bill that went through the California legislature is going to be to, basically create two classes of car owners: those who can, pursue lemon law claims when their car screws up, and then those who are not able to get into the court where it's possible to do the discovery and the other, important things that need to be done to prove a lemon law case. So we're hoping that the governor vetoes this one as well, even though his other veto didn't go our way. This one's one where it's needed to protect primarily lower income car buyers.
So, Gavin, you hear that, Gavin? You do the right thing on this one, or else Mike will be mad.
Yeah, and we put an action alert on our website this week. It's SB 71 to let consumers know what they can do to oppose the governor signing the bill, and basically write him a letter, tell him about your lemon law experience or your bad car experience, and how you would be impacted by raising the limit here. They could have easily exempted the lemon law from this bill, and they decided not to. And guess why? Because the Alliance of Automotive Innovation and a bunch of debt collectors decided to push the bill, and they support it. So you automatically know the bill's probably not that great when you see that those are the two main supporters of it. So we're urging consumers to take a look at that one if you're in California.
Yeah, no one ever came out smelling squeaky clean being on the side of debt collectors. Hey, listener, have you gone to autosafety.org and clicked on donate? No? Wait, why? Oh, you have? Okay, go into your friend's pocketbook and take their credit card and donate on their behalf. I don't know if we're actually advising that. Keep in mind, everything coming out of my mouth is not approved by the Center for Auto Safety. It is generally pure nonsense.
Most isn't, yeah.
Okay, let's get an update on right to repair laws. We've talked about this a few times. Massachusetts passed a right to repair law, and a quick recap for listeners. This was to allow independent auto body and car repair services to access your computer data inside the car and, hey, help fix things. And so this article in MSN we have a link to, it starts off with an auto industry group said on Friday, car makers do not plan to immediately comply with a Massachusetts law requiring them to share vehicle data with independent repair shops, citing concerns about potential hacking. Wait, so a law was passed and they're just like, nah, am I reading this correctly?
Well, the first law was passed it was a referendum, and it was the right to repair referendum that went through Massachusetts, put the law into play. When it came almost time to enforce the law, NHTSA came in and said, whoa, this is going to be preempted because you basically you can't have long range wireless communications of basically you can't be able to. This would allow people to take over vehicles from long distance. There's a security issue there, and that's one reason the manufacturers were saying, it's going to be unsafe if this type of thing goes through the long range wireless. What Massachusetts and what NHTSA came back, Massachusetts kind of resisted. They all talked. NHTSA came back a few months later, I believe it was in August, and said, okay, your law is not preempted, but we have to figure out a way to do this using short range communications. Essentially, if you pull your car to the shop, the shop owner can then look at your vehicle diagnostic data using some sort of Bluetooth interface or something that operates in a local area, but doesn't allow for outside security issues to happen from miles away. And now after all that happened, manufacturers are saying, well, that's great, but we're not going to be able to comply with this right now. I mean, they're not making vehicles that comply with it, and probably getting the parts and the designs for the parts that they're going to need to go into vehicles to enable this type of communication would take them, a year or two minimum. I think they have to plan things out pretty far in advance to get them into vehicles. So it's going to be interesting to continue to follow this, especially because now Maine is on the referendum in November has got a very similar law. I think it's almost identical to the Massachusetts law. So we're starting to see a movement pick up to have the Massachusetts law, move across America. No other states are really pursuing that type of legislation right now. So I'll be interested to see if there are not federal right to repair laws that are pushed in the future by industry to kind of counteract this movement amongst the states and to get a one national standard that applies here. But it's certainly something to follow, and it's impacted a lot. Even drivers. I think some drivers didn't have certain crash avoidance features enabled in Massachusetts because Subaru, I believe it was resisting one of these, was resisting this law and saying we basically can't comply with that law. So it's difficult. We hope they all work it out for the benefit of Massachusetts drivers like Fred. And ultimately, I think we want more states to pick up on the idea and maybe look at a federal right to repair if that can be done in a fair manner.
Okay, so
I'm sorry, Anthony. The article also said that these people are negotiating with the Attorney General of Massachusetts. Now, I guess I'm naive, but I always thought negotiations with law enforcement occurred in a courtroom. How does this work?
I'm going to try it the next time I'm pulled over. I'm sorry I can't comply with that law. Let's negotiate.
Yeah, I'd like to negotiate this speeding ticket, please. Yeah. That'll go far.
Yeah, I would suggest that attorneys general of many states play, part of their role is law enforcement, but a lot of it is political, and that's what you're seeing there.
Okay, is that your campaign slogan?
You for
that. Okay. This week, let's move on to the Tao of Fred. And this week, this one was prompted by a news story about a failure with Google Maps. It's a sad and interesting story where it was there's a family that's suing Google because they followed the Google Map directions and it led somebody off of a bridge that no longer existed. There's a whole bunch of interesting things to this case. It was happening at night, I believe. It was low visibility. There was no markings on the road saying, hey, this bridge doesn't exist. The local people in the area, they had submitted to Google repeatedly over the years saying, remove this from your system because this is dangerous. So what prompted this, that's what prompted this week's Tao of Fred. And it's, hey, Fred, how do these map things work? And is it possible that Google is sending me down one road so it's faster for their employees on another road? Okay, maybe not that part, but I suspect that happens at times.
You've now entered the Tao of Fred.
Just leaving an interval here for your intro, Anthony.
Oh, no, I got to edit out your...
respect for your production. So here's how the phone GPS works. So there's really three steps. The first is that somebody has to identify the location of a reference point. That can be a road or a geographical feature, could be a bridge. But normally what happens is that there are devices that can be put into your car that you can use to drive around and identify routers that are not suitably protected and identify their location. The identity of these routers then goes into a database somewhere. There are also what are called beacons that are installed by software manufacturers into a lot of devices. Beacons are kind of like electronic ticks. They suck a little bit of electricity out of your system without permission, and they broadcast some information about exactly where you're located.
I'm pretty sure I was in a relationship like that once.
Yeah. So those are beacons. There are landmarks. So we're given the information that's available using satellite information, pictorial information, also the kind of information picked up by those little cars with the cameras that are roaming the streets for Google Maps purposes. They can identify the location of landmarks, and then cell towers. They know where the cell towers are. Each one's individually identified. And of course, the satellites overhead, the GPS and GNSS, GLONASS, Galileo, QZSS, and Beidou systems all provide additional information about the location. So the world gets mapped using these devices, and all that information exists in a database somewhere, which is the second step. The second step is to take these information and put it into a database that's accessible to essentially everybody, but also to your car when it's driving down the road, or to your phone more properly when it's driving down the road. And it references these other databases. It picks up signals itself. And then the computer cross-references these to the information in a database to figure out exactly where you are using a process called triangulation. I don't know if you know what that term means, but basically, if you know where you are relative to one reference and you draw a circle around that reference, you can figure out how far away from the reference you are. But that's a circle. So if you have two references, you draw a circle around that other reference at the appropriate distance, and then you can identify a line between them that somewhere on that line is where you're located. But if you have three references and you draw three circles, basically those circles intersect, and that gives you a pretty good location of where the phone is located at that moment. The accuracy depends upon the kind of information it's got and what's built into your phone, but that's the basic system. The references all generate virtual circles in your phone, identifies where the phone is. That information is then sent back to the server, which generates a map that it sends out to your phone, and then you see where you are on that map based on the information it's interpreted. It's pretty sophisticated stuff. So inside of your phone, I just looked at the iPhone 15. It's looking at the US GNSS system, which is a system of satellites overhead, GLONASS, which is the Russian equivalent system. It operates at a little bit higher altitude. These are all kind of 10,000, 11,000 miles above the Earth. Galileo system is a European equivalent, because when the US system, GNSS, became the standard, many other countries said, well, gee, they could turn that off if we ever need the information, so we better establish our own. So GLONASS was established by the Russians, Galileo by the Europeans, QZSS by the Japanese, and Beidou by the Chinese. iPhone 15 takes advantage of all of these. Generates a digital compass. There's also the Wi-Fi locations based on the references it's got, cellular towers, and the beacons. So taking all this information and putting it together, again, they generate a map that shows up in your phone. So it's a very sophisticated set of information, but it's all reliant on the database. Android or Google does much the same thing with their operating system. They're also looking at GPS and GLONASS and Aldo and all those other things. Accuracy that they go ahead.
Sorry, so it does all of this stuff too, but it with the GPS. But they also have the cars driving around mapping roads and whatnot.
Right.
So okay.
Right. Because when they put that road information in, they also put it in with geographic references, and so the reference information on your phone is much less accurate than the reference information that these cars have got, because they've got very fancy GPS receivers and GLONASS receivers and GNSS and what have you. So your phone can identify where you are using satellite references to maybe within a meter or two, something like that. But the very sophisticated receivers can identify the location of the vehicle or the antenna that's recording it down to something like maybe 30 centimeters or maybe even less. 30 centimeters is about, 4 inches, something like that. So it can then tag that information, that accurate, the cars going around mapping things can tag that information to certain geographic references. Like, if there's a statue, it knows where the statue is. And if the camera on your phone picks up that camera on your phone, or the camera in your car picks up that same statue, for example, they can use that as a reference. That's not the primary references that they use, probably, but it provides additional information. And the more information your phone is interpreting, the better the location identification is going to be.
So with all this data part of this, how are they still getting things wrong? Now, there's a more humorous example of the story that kicked us off. It's happened a number of times where people are, following these maps and they're driving off of boat launches, which is, people survive, they're fine. That's hilarious. But, how are they getting things that wrong? I had an example where Google Maps not too long ago was it wanted me to go the wrong way down Fifth Avenue. And I was like, hey, look, maybe I made too many jokes about your stuff and you're just trying to off me. But I did not make the right turn heading north up Fifth Avenue.
So the answer to that is, who is responsible for putting this information into the database? There's probably nobody at Google who is being paid to identify bridges that have collapsed. There's probably nobody there being paid to identify boat ramps that are inappropriately mapped. So when you're using this system on your car, you can often punch a button that says, do you want to update the information? Do you want to identify a problem? These buttons exist on your cars, but unless and until somebody takes the trouble to put this hazardous information into the phone or into the database, I should say, it's not going to show up on the map. It's not going to show up on the phone. So again, that's a problem we've been talking about, which is that with the automatic systems and safety critical systems in vehicles, there is nobody who's monitoring the status of those systems to say that they're operating the way they should. The same thing is true with the maps that are being offered by Apple and Google and everybody else who's offering a map on your phone. There's really no regulation that says this has to be done. There's no allocation of funds for people to say, identify all the bridges that are not working, identify all the work sites that are popping up. So it's a really ad hoc process, and apparently, according to these systems you've identified, or these incidents you've identified, it's not adequate. It's not up to the task yet. I've had similar things happen to me, although not as catastrophic, of course, but run down roads that really didn't exist and been sent around in circles by some of the systems. So yeah, they're very imperfect systems. And I think people, our listeners in particular, ought to be very careful about their reliance on the automated systems in the vehicles, and don't relax just because your car says it's driving itself, because it's not. And there's no, it's doing what it can do, but there's nobody saying that it has to do any certain thing. So
Awesome.
It's up to you.
We should all be our own very own safety driver.
I think so. I think that's good. Yes.
All right.
And I think the law reflects that too, that, you're not exempted from vigilance just because you have automated features in your car.
Well, I don't know if you visited San Francisco. I'm not sure if that's still true.
I don't live in San Francisco. I'm on the other side.
Okay. So Michael, can you get us up to speed on this case? Like, so the family's suing Google for this issue. Like, it's fascinating because, the kind of layman approach to this would be like, why weren't you paying attention? You drove off, like you can't listen to this machine. But it seems like there's actually some potential liability here. The main potential liability in this instance is that Michael put himself on mute. Well, he puts himself on mute during the Tower of Fred's because he's singing in the background. I wish I could just send everyone. He does this whole dance routine. It's very upsetting. Sorry.
I apologize. If you look at it was a very dark kind of semi-residential road and in the woods, so it's a very dark road. So if Google Maps is telling you, hey, there's a road ahead and you're driving, you might not have seen the gap in the road. There were still the formations of a bridge there, but it was partially collapsed. So it's tough, and if you're driving at certain speeds, you're not going to have time to react before you go off of it. So there's certainly some issues there, why the county or someone didn't have it marked, why it wasn't maintained, or the road closed in a way where vehicle access was prohibited is a question. But when there's a years long history of reporting a safety problem to Google, and they are they're not just a roadmap, they are actively navigating drivers from point A to point B. They have a duty, I believe, to update their maps, especially when they've been notified to a hazard of this extent. A bridge is out, someone can fall in the water and drown. Amazingly, it didn't happen I believe the bridge went out in 2013 and this crash was in 22. So for 9 years, the bridge was out and nothing like this happened. So it's a really sad case, but I would suggest that Google needs to do a better job of updating its maps if it wants people to rely on it to navigate them from point A to point B.
Well, I know there's a mechanism that exists for them to do it, because when the main road to which my little retreat abuts was being repaved over the last couple of months, they identified it as a road that was under repair. They would not provide directions to or from my house, because directions to and from my house transited this road that was under repair. So it seems clear to me that they have the technical means of doing this. Somehow there's got to be authorities putting the correct information into the system so that people are notified. I think the fault may lie with the Google Maps, but I think there's a lot of blame to go around.
Are you suggesting there ought to be a law?
There ought to be a law, yes, sir.
Piggly Wiggly. I think it's time for some recall roundup. How does that sound?
Strap in.
Hey, listeners, can you guess what the first recall we're going to talk about is? Oh, it's not the Ford Edsel. Did Ford make the Edsel? Yeah, it was the Edsel.
Yes, they did.
Named after Edsel Ford.
Not for very long.
Yeah, well, hopefully just like the GM. It kind of looked slightly better than the Cruise Origin.
It does.
Anyway, first recall is about rear view camera image may not display. This is Kia America. 83,000 plus vehicles. They're recalling certain 2019 Sorento vehicles, which sounds like a very tasty dish. Due to a manufacturer error, water may leak into the rear view camera, which can cause the rear view camera image not to appear on the display. As such, these vehicles fail to comply with the requirements of Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard number what, Michael? Come on, what's the number?
This is 111.
Oh, he wins. Look at that. That is true. You can go to your dealer. They'll inspect the harness and repair it for you. Why with all of these rear view cameras? Like this is...
Well, this is another one of those, when we first started seeing this as a problem, my initial suspicion was that it was going to be software issues, problems with interfacing with the infotainment system, because usually they display the same screen. And we've seen that, and we've seen a lot of non-compliances involving that. But we've also seen a lot of, it's almost like they jerry-rig these things into cars, these weird wiring configurations where you're exposing wiring harnesses to water. It's like they were putting them into cars that hadn't been designed for use with rear view cameras. So, it seems like a fairly simple process to get these things installed correctly compared to a lot of other things that are going on with cars. So we're still a little, I guess, confused as to why every week we're seeing a recall on rear view cameras. It's kind of disconcerting to get, when you see a standard like this, which has saved so many lives in rear collisions and driveways and in other areas, primarily children, and then you see it go through Congress and finally get passed and required on vehicles, and then the product that they're putting on the streets is crap and is getting recalled all the time. It doesn't make you feel very fuzzy inside.
No, it could also be that everything on the car is crapping out at the same rate, but just this is noticeable because it's a video and people notice when it's not working. So, I think that should alert people, in particular the manufacturers, to do a better job of monitoring the safety systems that they're building into the cars to make sure that they are operating properly and notifying people when they're not.
And listeners, if you're not feeling fuzzy inside, please consume more fiber. Next recall is, Kia wins again. Loss of drive power from fuel pump failure. A lot of fuel pump issues too run across, not as much as rear view cameras. Kia is recalling certain 2018 to 2021 Stinger vehicles. Oh, they're tough. The fuel control valve plunger may stick inside the high pressure fuel pump, causing overpressurization and loss of drive power. I think that happened inside my toilet tank once. This is 18,000 plus vehicles.
And they've been looking into this for a while. It looks like initially Kia was unable to find a loss of motive power in the complaints, but which is really a key here, because you rarely see NHTSA dig in and want to get a recall when there's not on a fuel pump issue where there's some kind of hesitation or until you see stalling or loss of motive power. That's where the safety issues kind of kick in, because you're talking about vehicles stopping in the middle of intersections, stopping in the middle of the highway, that sort of thing that increases the danger. So it looks like this one's going to be solved through an inspection and replacing the full fuel pump if there's a problem, but also it looks like they're going to be doing some type of software fix as well. So that should be coming out in the next month, I think. November 7th, early November is when owner notification will begin. So be on the lookout for that.
Well, overpressurization in a fuel pump is an interesting failure mode because that generally causes fuel to leak. So I'm puzzled by this one a little bit, that overpressurization caused the fuel pump to stop delivering fuel to the engine. It doesn't sound
It looks
right.
like it leaves it stuck in an open position, which is weird. Anyway, I don't know how it's a Stinger. Maybe it's got some, new engine we've never heard of.
Yeah,
Some new fuel tank. I mean, I have no idea what a Stinger looks like, but I'm sure, it requires you to have a shaved head or a mohawk to purchase one.
What's wrong with mohawks?
Nothing's wrong with them, but I think if I went in there and be like, I want the Stinger, they'd be like, nope, you're not tall enough to get in this vehicle, son. Like, come on, man. Next one, high voltage battery may short circuit. Battery failure can cause a loss of drive power, increasing the risk of a crash. Battery failure can also increase the risk of a fire. And to test your battery, just take it and lick it and stick it on your tongue and see if it still has power like you did when you were a little kid with 9-volt batteries. If your tongue can crease across both parts of a car battery, I mean, you should be doing something else with your life. All right. Ford Motor Company, 2,954 vehicles. Ford is recalling certain 2020 to 2022 Lincoln Aviator and Ford Explorer vehicles equipped with a 3.0 liter plug-in hybrid engine, manufacturing defect in one or more of the high voltage battery cells may result in internal short circuit and battery failure. Possibly related to this is Ford just shut down one of their battery plants because they're like, let's not do this. Maybe not, though. Maybe it's just a coincidence. We know there's no such thing as coincidences. Dealers will perform a battery engine control module diagnostic test and replace your undercoating. They'll replace the high voltage battery pack as necessary.
Well, this one's got a folded anode tab, which is basically a defect in the battery cell that they're looking for that can cause loss of power. This one does not involve fire that we can tell in the battery, but a loss of power. And I believe there was a previous recall in May that involved some of these same vehicles and related vehicles. So
yes,
the new recall is going to start probably early October. It looks like owner notification around October 2nd through the 6th. So everyone be on the lookout for that, because you do not want to lose battery power. And, if you've got one of these batteries with a folded anode, you want to get a new one in your vehicle that doesn't have that problem.
Yeah, don't unfold it yourself. I have no idea what that means and if it's possible. Last one we've got is a loose battery cable. Oh, more batteries. Loose battery cables may cause fire. A fire while parked or driving can increase the risk of injury. It really says this in the recall notice. A fire while parked or driving can increase the risk of injury. I thank you for pointing that out to us. This is Chrysler 4,000 plus vehicles. Chrysler is recalling certain 2023 to 2024 Alfa Romeo Tonale. Come on. And 2023 to 2024 Dodge Hornet plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. Dodge Hornet and a Kia Stinger. They walk into a bar.
Match
There's something there. Okay. So the 12 volt battery positive cable and or high voltage connector cable may not be tightened properly because it's a Friday afternoon and they're like, come on, we're going to watch the game. Okay. Which can cause overheat the electrical connections and result in a fire while parked or driving. Park outside warning on this one.
Yep. That's the big note on this was the park outside warning. And that means that you shouldn't park in, garages or anything, especially your garage, but also public parking structures and other things. So
I want to start a business called Park Outside, where it's just big open paved fields. Hey, you got one of these cars? Park outside. The parking spaces are each like 500 yards long because that's in a wide circumference radius. That could be something.
Or it could be. It's just going to take up a lot more space, and we already know that parking and housing are fighting in cities right now. So
why are you crushing my dreams?
Well, you should know these things. You live in the big city.
So it looks like this one. They're the solution here?
Bring your car in and make sure those nuts and bolts are tightened. This one's a pretty simple fix.
Okay.
Which I don't know why it's taken them a month to get it going, but they have reasons, I'm sure.
That happens.
But if you have one of these affected vehicles, do get it done, because your car is probably better off if it does not set itself on fire.
And that's from the chief engineer here. These are words to live by. Don't let your car get on fire.
I've done analysis on that. Yeah, it works out every time.
Okay, next week you'll discuss the math on that. And for that, listeners, that's the end of our time for this week. Next week, we're going to cover a story that we didn't get to this week about, where did it go? I lost the link. It's about bicycles and road safety. We're going to cover that one next week. It's a good one. So, hey, thanks for listening. Thanks for telling your friends. Thanks for donating. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
For more information, visit www.autosafety.org.